The storm came from nowhere, thick clouds swirling above the jungle moon of Veraxis 5. Eli's small scout ship shook violently as alarms screamed in his ears. He tried to steady the controls, but the system was already failing. The ship spun, lights flickering, then plummeted through the atmosphere like a dying comet. He closed his eyes as trees rushed up to meet him. The crash wasn't soft. The ship tore through massive alien ferns before smashing into the ground. Sparks flew. Smoke filled the air. And Eli's head hit the console before everything turned black. When he opened his eyes, he was lying among broken metal and shattered glass. Blood ran down his forehead, and pain shot through his left leg. He tried to move, groaning as he dragged himself out of the wreckage. The sky above was orange, two suns glowing dimly behind clouds. Strange birds with neon feathers circled above. Shrieking at the noise, Eli limped away from the wreck, grabbing his emergency pack. He didn't know where he was. This wasn't the landing zone. His signal beacon was broken, and the communication system was fried. He was alone, and worse. He was in the Forbidden Zone, a place all explorers were warned about. He moved carefully through the thick alien jungle. Massive trees twisted upward like claws, and plants hissed when he got too close. The air smelled sharp, like copper and wet stone, and then he heard it a growl. Low, deep, and near, he froze, heart pounding, hiding behind a large root. Through the gaps in the vines, he saw a giant. She stood at least 12 feet tall, muscular, covered in dark gray skin with tribal markings. Long white hair flowed down her back, and her yellow eyes glowed in the twilight. Fangs poked from her lips, and she held a stone spear longer than Eli's body. She sniffed the air and turned her head slowly, her gaze locked onto the tree where Eli was hiding. He didn't breathe. Was she hunting him? She stepped forward, her massive feet crunching the leaves closer. Eli readied the small plasma knife in his hand. Then, suddenly she stopped. She dropped something on the ground near his hiding spot, a strange fruit and a flask of clear liquid. Without a word, she turned and disappeared into the jungle. Eli waited in silence, confused. Why would a predator feed its prey? He stayed hidden until night fell, but hunger got the better of him. Crept out, grabbed the fruit, and sniffed it carefully. It smelled sweet. He took a bite, warm juice filled his mouth, and his stomach growled in response. The flask held clean water, the first safe drink he'd had all day. He ate and drank in silence, listening to the jungle sounds in the distance. He thought he heard the Giantess again, her deep voice humming, but it was calm. It's peaceful, not threatening. Eli didn't sleep much that night, his knife clutched tight in his hand. But the Giantess never returned. The next morning, he limped through the jungle again. He needed shelter, a place to recover. After an hour, he found a cave strangely neat, almost like someone had cleaned it. Inside were bones of animals, dried herbs, and a bed made of woven leaves. Eli stared at it, heart racing. This must be her home. He turned to leave. But then she appeared, blocking the entrance. Her tall frame filled the space, and her yellow eyes watched him quietly. Eli raised his knife, ready for the end. But she didn't attack. She stepped aside, giving him room, and then sat near the cave wall. She took out a small creature from a pouch and began cleaning it food for herself. Not him. She ignored him, as if he were just another animal in the forest. Eli lowered the knife slowly, confused more than ever. Hours passed. She didn't speak, not a single word. But when Eli's leg gave out and he collapsed in pain, she stood quickly. She moved to him with surprising gentleness. With her massive hand, she reached into her pouch and pulled out a glowing blue gel. She rubbed it on his wound, and within seconds, the pain dulled. Eli stared up at her, breathing hard. She looked down at him, not like prey,
Not like food,
but something else, something curious, gentle, and lonely. And that was when Eli realized, maybe this Giantess wasn't a monster at all. Maybe she was something completely different. And maybe she didn't want to eat him, not like that. The cave was quiet, except for the soft crackling of the fire the Giantess had built. Eli sat on the woven bed of leaves, his injured leg now wrapped in thick plant fibers. The glowing blue salve still pulsed gently over his wound. And to his shock, the pain was almost gone. He kept glancing toward the corner where the giantess sat, calmly sharpening her stone spear. She hadn't spoken a word, not a growl, not a hiss, just silence. She was terrifying to look at. Her shoulders were broad, her arms like tree trunks, and her face bore marks of old battles. But there was something else, a strange calmness, a presence that didn't feel like danger when her glowing yellow eyes met his. She didn't snarl or attack, she just blinked, tilted her head slightly, then returned to her task. Eli didn't understand it. Why was she helping him? Hadn't she eaten him yet? Maybe she was waiting until he was stronger, tastier, more useful. Still, she hadn't bound him, hadn't threatened him, hadn't even spoken. She had treated him like a guest. Hours passed. Eli watched her prepare food. Roasting small lizards over the fire, she ate first, biting into the meat with sharp fangs. Then she tossed him one piece, her eyes scanning his reaction. He caught it with shaky hands and hesitated. Was it a test? Was she observing his loyalty or his fear? The meat was surprisingly good, salty, smoky, and warm in his stomach. He gave a small nod of thanks, unsure if she'd even understand. To his surprise, her lips curled up not in a snarl, but a faint smile. It was the first expression he had seen from her that didn't involve tension or cold observation. That night, she curled up on the far side of the cave, her massive body folded like a watchful guardian. Eli stayed awake for a long time, his eyes shifting between the flickering shadows and her sleeping form. She didn't move, didn't snore, just breathed slowly like a mountain resting. Eventually, exhaustion took him, and he drifted into a restless sleep. The next morning, he awoke to find fresh water and another strange fruit beside him. She was gone. His first instinct was to run too, escape while he had the chance. But something in him hesitated. Where would he go? The jungle outside was full of beasts and poisonous plants. She had food, shelter, safety. He had nothing. He stayed. Hours later, she returned, carrying a bundle of herbs and two strange animals tied by the feet. Eli stood back as she worked, skinning the creatures with careful hands. Her movements were smooth, practiced, even graceful for someone her size. She didn't look at him until she was done, and motioned with her head toward the fire. He understood help. He moved slowly, helped stack the firewood, placed the meat, and adjusted the stones. She didn't scold or grunt, just watched and nodded. That night, they ate together. And this time, Eli didn't flinch when she passed him the food after the meal. She picked up a sharp stick and began drawing on the cave floor. Eli leaned closer. Curious, she drew a circle, then a small figure beside a much larger one. She tapped the big figure, then gently touched her own chest. Then she pointed to the small one, and to him, Eli blinked. She was drawing them. He smiled nervously, picked up a stick, and drew a third figure, spaceship, then made it crash. She tilted her head again, then added lightning above it, together, without words. They shared the story of his arrival for the first time since the crash. Eli didn't feel completely alone. Later, as the fire dimmed, she leaned back and let out a deep sigh. She looked at him again, not like prey, not like a stranger, but like someone she was starting to understand. She reached into a small pouch on her belt and pulled out a polished stone shaped like a claw. With great care, she placed it beside him, a gift. Eli stared at it, unsure what it meant, but deep down, something stirred. This wasn't just a monster. She wasn't keeping him as food. She wasn't even afraid of him. She was lonely, and somehow, despite her terrifying appearance, she had shown him more kindness than most humans ever had. The cave didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like shelter. The morning was calm, but Eli's heart wasn't. He sat at the mouth of the cave, watching the alien jungle breathe with soft light. Mist curled between trees like whispers, and far in the distance, unknown creatures cried out, but none of that worried him now. It was her. The giantess moved slowly behind him, Silent as shadow, he could feel her presence. Heavy and warm, like the heat of a small sun, she sat closer than before. Too close, Eli shifted slightly, pretending to check his bandage, but she didn't miss the movement. She made a low sound. Something like a hum and a question wrapped. In one, he looked at her, and for the first time, really saw her, not just her size or fangs, but her expression. She wasn't threatening him. She was trying to understand him. Her glowing yellow eyes studied his face with intense focus. Then, slowly she reached out, her fingers wide and unsure. Eli froze. Her hand was enormous, big enough to crush his skull without effort. It hovered just inches from his cheek. Then, with the gentleness of a falling feather, she touched him. A single finger, warm and rough, brushed along his jaw. Eli gasped, heart pounding. She pulled back quickly, as if burned, her face turned away, eyes low for a moment. Neither of them moved. Then she stood and walked to the other side of the cave, her head bowed, her shoulders slumped on in anger but shame. Eli sat stunned, confused. What had just happened? Why had she touched him like that? He'd expected hunger, maybe violence, but not that. That night, rain fell hard outside the cave. Thunder rolled over the hills like war drums. Eli couldn't sleep. He glanced toward her, curled against the far wall, her back to him. He could hear something strange, soft sounds. She was crying. It was deep, guttural, and raw, not the cry of a beast, but of someone who had held in too much for too long. Eli didn't know what to do. She had saved him, fed him, protected him, and healed his wounds, and all he had given her in return was fear. The next morning, the cave was filled with a strange smell. Smoke. Eli stepped outside and saw a black trail in the sky. A nearby section of forest had caught fire, probably from lightning. Flames danced dangerously close to the edge of the cliffs. Before he could shout, she was already moving fast, graceful, powerful. She ran toward the fire, picking up heavy rocks and breaking apart trees to create a barrier. Eli watched in awe. She fought the fire like a warrior, her skin marked with soot, her muscles flexing under pressure. Hours later, soaked and dirty, she returned. She looked at Eli with tired eyes. But there was something more, something uncertain. He stood up, stepped forward slowly, and raised his hand. Her eyes widened as his fingers gently touched her face. This time, he nodded once, saying nothing. Her expression shifted: confusion, then surprise, then something soft. She reached up and held his hand gently in her massive palm. In that moment, everything changed. The fear between them began to fade, replaced by something far more dangerous: connection. They sat together by the fire that night, drawing more shapes in the dirt. She tried to mimic his words, simple ones like fire, water, Eli. Her voice was rough, strange but eager. She touched her own chest and said, "Raka." Her name. Eli smiled. "Raka," he repeated. She gave a pleased sound, low and almost musical. Later, she showed him a drawing of 2 moons and a path connecting them. She pointed at the sky, then back at herself. Was she telling him she came from another place, or that she wanted to take him there? The thought sent a chill down his spine and a strange warmth in his chest. Whatever Raka was, she wasn't just some wild alien. She was intelligent, thoughtful, and full of emotions she couldn't yet explain. And for some reason, she had chosen him, not as prey, not as a pet, but something far more dangerous. Something that neither of them fully understood yet, but something that was growing. Every time she touched him, days passed like dreams inside the cave. The bond between Eli and Raka, the giantess, had grown stronger with every silent gesture. Though words still escaped them, their eyes spoke, their hands drew stories in the dirt. She fed him, protected him, and now sat beside him as though he belonged there. But Eli still carried questions, deep and heavy. Who was she really? Where did she come from? Why did she seem so alone in this wild, dangerous world? One foggy morning, Raka left early, leaving behind a trail of smooth stones for him to follow. Eli limped after her slowly, curious. She guided him deeper into the jungle farther than they had ever gone together. The plants grew stranger here, taller, older. They reached a massive rock formation carved into the shape of twisted faces and reaching arms. A temple, maybe, or a ruin. Raka stepped inside with reverence. Eli followed cautiously. The air inside cool and filled with a soft blue glow. The walls were covered with ancient marking symbols, carvings and painted images that shimmered. Slightly under the light, she knelt at one wall, brushing away dust with her hand, revealing a giant mural. Eli stepped forward and froze. The images told a story. Her story, dozens of Raka's kind. Strong and peaceful, living in harmony with nature then. Smaller figures appeared, humanoids in armor, ships falling from the sky. The smaller ones pointed weapons, enslaving the giants, binding them with chains. Eli's throat tightened. They weren't monsters. They were hunted, feared, broken. Then came the last part of the mural. One giant left alone, holding a broken spear, surrounded by the bones of her kin Raka. She had survived while her people had perished, not because she was the strongest, but maybe because she had no choice. Eli turned to look at her. She wasn't watching the mural, she was watching him. Her eyes weren't glowing with anger. They shimmered with sorrow, as if silently asking, "Do you understand now?" Eli nodded slowly, placing his hand on the mural beside hers. He whispered, "I'm sorry." She didn't understand the words, but she understood the emotion. She reached out, placed her hand over his, and gave the softest hum he had ever heard from her, a song of mourning, maybe, or gratitude. They sat in silence for a long time. Eli didn't ask how long ago it all happened. He didn't ask who started the war. None of it mattered now. What mattered was the truth. Raka wasn't a beast. She was a survivor of a forgotten genocide. She had been forced to hide, to live alone, to be feared, and yet she had still chosen kindness when she found him injured and afraid. As they left the temple, the air felt heavier. The forest around them looked the same, but Eli didn't. He didn't see Raka as a protector anymore. He saw her as something. Even a wounded soul who still hoped that night. He sat beside the fire and tried to draw his own story in the dirt. His family, his crew, the crash. Raka leaned in and traced each symbol gently. Then, using her thick fingers, she drew herself beside his tiny figure. She placed a hand over it, then tapped her heart. Eli felt something stir inside him, something terrifying and beautiful. She didn't just want to protect him, she wanted to belong, and maybe she wanted him to belong to her too. He couldn't sleep that night. He stared at the ceiling of the cave. His heart heavy with a truth of its own. He had come to this planet by accident. But what if Raka wasn't the accident? What if she was the reason he had survived the crash? What if everything that scared him at first was leading him here to this? Raka lay beside the fire, her back to him, but her hand slowly reached out, resting near his, not touching, just waiting, an invitation, not a command. Eli didn't move for a long time. But when he finally did, he placed his hand on top of hers. Not out of fear, not out of obligation, but something closer to understanding in that moment. Nothing about her seemed monstrous. Her size didn't matter, nor her strength. Only the quiet truth they both shared, that they were alone in this world until now. The wind howled outside the cave like a lonely beast, searching for something it had lost. Inside, Eli and Raka sat close to the fire, its orange glow dancing across stone walls and tired faces. She didn't speak, she never really did, but her silence had changed. It wasn't just peaceful anymore. It was heavy. It was watching. Eli felt it in the way she looked at him now. Not like a patient healer, not like a protector, but something else, something deeper, hungrier, that night. She didn't lie on the far side of the cave like usual. Instead, she rested closer, her back pressed against the same wall as his. She didn't touch him, not directly, but her breath warmed the air near his neck, and her massive fingers curled in his direction. Half an inch closer, and they would be touching. Eli stayed still, pretending to be asleep. But his heart beat loud enough to echo through his bones. He remembered the murals, the extinction of her people, the pain she carried, and still, even knowing all that, there was something in the way she looked at him that made the cave feel even smaller. Not dangerous, just intense. In the morning, Eli stepped outside to gather fruit. He needed air, distance, clarity. The forest was thick with mist and strange birdsong. As he bent down to reach a glowing fruit, a shadow passed over him. Raka, she, stood nearby, her gaze fixed not on him, but on something behind him. Eli turned sharply, just in time to see a long-limbed predator crawling out from the brush. Its skin was wet and black, its mouth split open with rows of teeth. Before Eli could grab his blade, Raka lunged. She didn't roar, didn't hesitate. Her movements were fast and savage, arms locking the creature, fangs flashing. The jungle shook as she slammed the predator against a tree and crushed it with one brutal strike. Eli stood frozen, watching her chest rise and fall. Blood dripped from her arms. But her eyes weren't angry, they were wild. She turned to him, breathing heavy, muscles flexing beneath her skin. Then something strange happened. She growled not at him, but around him, circling him. Low and protective, her massive body moved slowly, placing herself between him and the forest. He realized in that moment, she wasn't just defending him, she was claiming him. That night, back at the cave, she didn't let him out of her sight. She followed every movement. Her expression unreadable. Eli sat near the fire, but she came closer, kneeling beside him. Her hand reached out, not hesitating this time, and gently brushed his shoulder. He looked up into her glowing yellow eyes. There was a pull there, not just of curiosity, but of something physical, primal. It made the air thick between them. She leaned closer, her nose nearly touching his neck. She inhaled slowly, deeply. Then she stopped. She pulled back, closing her eyes as if fighting herself. Her fists clenched, her jaw tightened. She made a sound, a soft whine. Frustrated, restrained, Eli didn't move. He should have been afraid, but he wasn't. He was fascinated. She wanted something, but not food. This hunger was different. It wasn't about survival. It was about him. Raka turned her back and sat far from the fire again. She pressed her hands to her chest, breathing slowly. Trying to calm whatever storm was inside her, Eli stared at her from across the cave. His mind spun with confusion, questions, and strange emotions. This giantess who could kill with one blow, who had saved him, fed him, healed him, now seemed to tremble under the weight of desire. But she didn't act on it. She had the strength to take whatever she wanted, yet she didn't. She waited for what? Permission? An invitation? The next morning, Raka placed a new drawing in the dirt, a small figure standing on a cliff. Beside a much larger figure with stars above them, she tapped both symbols, then pointed at him, then herself, then waited, watching him carefully. Eli swallowed hard, then bent down and added to the image, drawing a line that connected their hands. Raka's eyes widened. She reached out, not to grab, not to demand, but to hold, and this time he let her. Their fingers didn't fit. The jungle sky opened above them like a curtain of fire and ice. Twin moons floated side by side, casting a silver glow on the cliffs. Eli stood at the edge, the wind brushing his face. Behind him, Raka waited silently. She had brought him here for a reason. He turned and saw her kneeling in the grass, her eyes locked on him, not glowing fiercely like before, yes, but softly, as if begging for an answer. Beside her, in the dirt, she had drawn another image to beings under the moons, holding hands surrounded by stars. She tapped the drawing, then placed her hand over her chest, then pointed to him. She wanted him to stay. Not just for safety, not just as a friend, but something more. Eli took a deep breath. His heart pulled in two directions. His escape pod was finally working. He had spent days repairing it in secret. Just in case, tomorrow he could launch into orbit, send a signal, and get picked up by a human ship, return home, return to normal life. But what even was normal now? Was it cubicles? Empty relationships? Fake smiles? Because here, with Raka, he had been seen not as a soldier, not as a tool, but as a living, breathing soul. Raka stood slowly and walked toward him, her huge body blocking the moonlight. But her presence warmed the air around him. She knelt. Before him, not in weakness, but in offering. She placed something in his hands, a pendant made of bone and crystal, shaped like the mark of her people, a symbol of bonding. Eli looked at the gift, then at her. Her lips trembled, not from fear, but from hope. He remembered the first time he saw her, huge, terrifying, silent. He thought she was going to eat him, but now he realized she had been just as afraid, afraid to touch, afraid to hope, afraid to lose someone again. Eli closed his fingers around the pendant and stepped forward. He placed his hand gently on her cheek. She leaned into it with a quiet sound. Almost a purr. "I don't know what I'm doing," he whispered, "but neither do you, right?" She didn't understand the words, but she felt them, and in return, she placed her forehead gently against his. That night, they didn't return to the cave. They lay beneath the stars, her arm around him like a living wall. Her body was massive, her breath slow and deep, but her heart, it beat with his. Eli stared at the stars for a long time. He knew that up there, ships passed, humans moved. Orders were followed, and he could go back to that world. But something inside whispered, "Why?" He looked at Raka, her eyes closed, one large hand resting lightly on his chest. He had faced war, loss, isolation, and silence. But here, in the arms of a forgotten giantess, he had found something sacred, peace, and something even rarer. Choice. In the morning, he returned to his escape pod alone. He opened the hatch, placed his emergency beacon inside, and turned it on. Then, without a second thought, he shut the hatch and walked away. He didn't want rescue anymore. He didn't want to be saved, because out here he had already been saved, not by machines or weapons, but by a heart bigger than his own. When Raka saw him return, without his gear, without the beacon, her expression changed. She stood still, unsure, until Eli lifted her pendant around his neck and smiled. Her body trembled not with fear, but joy. She stepped forward, slowly, as if afraid it wasn't real. He opened his arms, and she embraced him not as a pet, not as prey, but as hers. Her hand could wrap around both of his easily, but the feeling, it fit perfectly. Asterisk. The days after Eli's choice felt different. He no longer looked at the jungle as something to escape. Now, it was home. The sky, the trees, the wind, it all felt alive in a new way, because this time, he wasn't surviving alone. Raka walked beside him now, not in silence, but in comfort. She began humming more often, a deep, calming sound that vibrated through her chest. Eli found himself humming Bikovki, awkward, but it made her smile. Their bond had no language. But it didn't need one anymore. They built a new space. Together near the cliff, Raka brought stone, wood, and vines. Eli taught her how to shape, to carve, to build. It wasn't just a shelter, it was theirs. One morning, a loud rumble echoed through the sky. A flash of silver broke through the clouds. A ship. Eli's old distress signal left behind in the pod had finally been picked up. A human vessel hovered low, scanning the surface. Raka tensed. Her body shifting into a defensive stance, she reached for her spear, but Eli touched her arm gently. "No," he said softly, "they won't take me." He stepped out into the clearing and raised both hands. The ship's ramp lowered with a hiss, and a squad of armored soldiers marched out. They pointed weapons, shouting orders, but Eli didn't flinch. "I'm not leaving." He told them, "You came too late." Their eyes moved past him and widened. At the sight of Raka, weapons raised again. One soldier shouted, "Monster! Stay back." But Eli stepped in front of her, arms wide. "She saved me," he said. "She fed me, healed me, protected me. She didn't hurt me. I chose her." The soldiers hesitated. I'm sure this wasn't the scared castaway they expected. This was a man who had found something they could not understand. Raka remained behind him, calm, her yellow eyes locked on the humans. She didn't growl, didn't move. She waited, trusting him. Eli turned to the captain and said, "If you came to rescue me, you already failed. If you came to kill her, you'll have to kill me too." There was silence. Then the captain, a weathered woman, with tired eyes, lowered her weapon. "Your choice," she said quietly. She turned, ordered her team back, the ramp closed, and the ship slowly rose into the clouds. When the sky was clear again, Raka stepped forward. She touched Eli's chest, where his heart beat fast, then pointed at the sky, confused. He shook his head and smiled. "I already chose my sky," he whispered. Raka made a sound he'd never heard before, half laugh, half sigh. She bent down and placed her forehead against his again. The jungle around them whispered in the wind, and something new began that day. Not just a bond between two beings, but a new story, one the galaxy had never heard before. They were not predator and prey, not captor and prisoner. They were partners. Days turned to weeks. Other tribes, distant species, wandering explorers all heard rumors of a human who lived with a monster. But those who dared come close saw something else entirely. A home filled with music, drawings, carved symbols of unity, a tall, powerful giantess standing beside a small manequal in presence, and their story spread not in fear, but in wonder. Because when the world expected war, they chose peace. When others saw danger, they saw love. And when they could have walked away, they walked toward each other. And in a forgotten jungle, under twin moons, a man and a giantess proved one. Simple truth, sometimes what you fear the most just wants to hold your hand.